connection of the Gemara in a moment. We are on 36a. We're looking forward to finishing today the parak. Really, it's a cause of celebration. Finishing a chapter. Cause of celebration. Okay. Just want to say that the Gemaras have arrived. These Gemaras are sponsored by Nissim Harbon, and it's interesting. We were dealing with the Gemaras, Adam, and today the Gemaras arrive, and today is the funeral of Nissim's father. Wow. So it'll be a big Ilay Neshama, a rising of Neshama for Shlomo ben Rachel, and we're going to dedicate the class to Shlomo ben Rachel. Good morning, Nathan. Okay, you see the Hashgacha Pratit. Exactly, it had to come today, the day of the funeral. We are on 36A2. The last thing that we said was that there was a change in how they refer to things. Good morning, Ezra. We said when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, what they called shofar was now called chasotrot. What was called chasotrot was called shofar. And maybe I should read the language of the commentary that I had quoted. The right word is verbatim. That's or I had quoted. I did not. I want to read to you what he said regarding why things changed. Why was it that the world was upside down? We said, maybe I'll read you the language of the commentary. Maybe he says the following. He brings from the Toldos Zev. Why were these three things what was called a hadas, and a rava was called a safsafa was called a arava, and the shulchan was called a large table, the small table was called a large table today. The words. So he says, because in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, they used a shofar, they used chatzotrot. These were things that were used in the Beit HaMikdash. They took lulav and arava, like we also in the Beit HaMikdash, special mitzvah by the Beit HaMikdash. And we said also the arava was every day they had a special mitzvah arava, and the special table, golden table for the lechem hapanim. And all that was lost in the time of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And because of the great pain that, he says over here, because of the great pain that their world was turned upside down in their lifetime, therefore they changed the names of these things. And I'm saying, and they turned these names upside down, so to speak. Okay, God bless you. Now, the Gemara continues. We have the Mainafka Mina. The Gemara says, Rava and Safsafa, you have to know what's kosher for a for a lulav. So it's very important to know when you ask for a arava, they're going to give you a safsafa, which is not kosher when you get, because it's serrated and the leaves. And when you ask for safsafa, they give you a arava, so that's good. But what's the importance of knowing? And the Gemara says the fact that the name change of the table has a what's the importance of knowing that? There's no mitzvah that we do today with a table, so to speak. That there's a table, large. It's true. Dining table is like a mizbeach, and therefore, because we have guests at the table, it brings atonement. Therefore, there was certain communities, at least one community, that their custom was at a funeral to bury, maybe in France, to bury a person with using the table as the coffin. The wood from the table, because that would be a merit for the person to bring his mitzvah. Right, that would serve as a merit for him. But what is the halachic ramification of what you referred to in the past as a large table? Now is referred to the word that denoted a large table, the small table, the small table, the word is a small table and a large table. The Gemara says the practical difference is business purposes. Because if you contract with someone, I'm going to sell you a Torah, and then let's say in the beginning, let's say the Gemara says originally the Torah was, they called the large table the Torah, now the Torah indicates a small table. So therefore you could say, I contracted for a Torah. I said I'm going to sell you a Torah, and you come in, the customer saying I expected a large table. That's not the way. The large table is no longer called Torah. It's called.
Knew what the word meant until the date of the changeover, and there was a date on the star.
Right. So here, not necessarily. Let's say there's witnesses, not necessarily on the star, but this is the day the Beit Hamikdash this was from the time the Beit Hamikdash was destroyed. That was the change. That was the date, so to speak, Nathan, without any actual physical date. So therefore, then that will be the ramifications for that law. Is that clear, Ezra? Okay. Amar Abaye. So Abaye said, I want to tell you, there's a fourth one that we have to also add to the list. Amar Abaye af
and
lulav and table. Right. So shofar arava. Here comes the fourth one. By afan and emma hovlila bekosi. We're on 36A2, the bottom, the first column. Hovlila bekosi and bekosi kosi hovlila. Now, it sounds a little French or whatever. Morning. What is this all about? So, as you see in the commentary, the kosher animals have what we call like four stomachs. And how there's a whole process how the food is swallowed whole without chewing, and then it enters the first stomach, which is called the keres, and there the food begins to decay, and then from there it goes to the second stomach, which that's our focus here is the beit hakosot. That's the second stomach. That second stomach is called beit hakosot. A kos, we know kos yayin, cups. That stomach resembled the interior shape resembles many cups. So therefore it's called the house of cups. That stomach. In that stomach, when the food is softened over there, made into small masses, and then then it goes back, the cuds, then the food goes back to the mouth where it's chewed, and then they go past the beta kosot, past that second stomach, and they enter the third stomach, which is called the hamses. Which hamses is from the word like dissolving, something that melts, right? That's the third stomach. Now, and then from there it goes to the fourth. Now, let's focus on the second stomach and the third stomach. The beta kosot, the second stomach, which resembles the cups of wine, resemble cups, has a thick. The interior is very thick. The walls are thick. It's like doubled over. In contrast to the third stomach, the Hem says that is very thin. Rashi says a very extremely thin wall. The Hem says it's extremely thin. So now, if you have a very extremely thin wall,
it's porous,
and it gets a puncture. Thank you, Ralph. And it gets punctured. So now we have a law called treva, right? If an animal has one of the things that they check when they slaughter an animal is they check the lungs to see if there's any hole in the lung. If there was a nail in the lung, if there's a nail in the lung, that nail would make the animal not kosher because a hole in the lung means that the animal will die within a year. So even though you did a perfect slaughtering, they slaughtered the majority of the windpipe and the esophagus. And so you say, Rabbi, it's a good slaughtering. They did a good job. And they did it right. But the problem is, but it's not sufficient. Right. What it does, that slaughtering would remove it from being a status of, let's say, Vela, but it's still a treifa. The animal is still not kosher. That's called a treifa, an animal that will die within a year because, let's say, if some interior problem the animal has inside the animal. Right, exactly. Someone like a man, like a human being that's going to die within a year. Someone has a certain type of interior, something on the inside of his body that's certain types of holes in different places. So now you have to know, so the halacha says, if a needle goes into this called the place of the cups, the beta. Exactly. So therefore, halacha states if the second stomach, which is thick, as Nathan says, gets a hole on one side, but it didn't go all the way to the other side, it didn't go through and through. So then it's not called a treifa. The animal will still live. But the other side that didn't get punctured will fill up the hole, will fill up the gap. But however, when the hem says the third stomach, which is very thin the wall, gets a hole, there's nothing to fill it, and therefore it would be a treifa. So now, so now you have to know what are they called? Because what they used to call what was called the be'akosos, the cups, which was stomach number two, is if you say the be'akosot, that's referring to stomach number three today. And therefore, and if you say it's kosher, if it goes in the be'er kosot in the cup area, it's kosher. But today the cup area is no longer is really the third stomach, and therefore which is not actually the cup area anymore. But if it's referred to the third stomach and it's not kosher, people will make a big mistake. So therefore, you have to know that there's been a name change that they for whatever reason they changed the name. That's something to think about and what would be the reason why they changed it. But that would be um, the big practical ramifications. That's what I'm about it. So
Four areas of their life. There was the time area of their life. There's the food area of their life. There's the uh, um, business area of their life, and then there's the observance area of their life. It's sort of like the four areas of someone's life. They wanted to make one change in each to know that things are different now.
okay, but the thing is with Abaye doesn't say that it happened by the destruction of Beit Hamikdash. It's an independent, right? Abaye says af anu nema. So now it doesn't seem. Let's see if the commentary mentions. Is Abaye just stating we're going to say? Is he saying that happened from the time of the destruction of Beit Hamikdash, or Abaye is just saying we just have an hour day in our day. So let's see where if they so they don't pick up on this point. So the Gemara says, let's read it inside. The Gemara says, Amabai, Afanema Huvlila, that which was originally called the Huvlila, which is the Huvlila, which would be the third stomach, is now called the Beit Kosei. It's now called the House of Cups, and what was called the Beit Kosei, which was called the Beit Kosei, which used to be the second stomach, which was thick. Now they called the Hovlila. The Nafkamina, what's the practical application? The Machat, for a needle. Now on the right side of 36A2, good morning, Morris. Shenimse'et ba'uvi beit HaKosot. If there's a needle, Morris, that's found in this thickness of the Beit HaKosot, in the thickness of the Beit HaKosot, the Mitzad Echad used to be Mitzad Echad, because this was thick, if it was only on one side, Keshera, it is kosher because the animal's not gonna die as a result of that hole. Mishneit Sadim, but if it's found on both sides, then only then it would be what? A treifa. Then it will be a treifa. Okay, so therefore that's why it's very important to know the name change, because people could make a big mistake. Rabbi, I found a hole in the Be'er Kosot. So today the Be'er Kosot is not the thick place anymore. It's referred to the thin one, the third one, and therefore you would say it is not kosher. So therefore it's very important to know what is what. You got to know the facts on the ground to answer a question. There's a lot of ramifications if you don't have the clear facts. Amar Rav Ashi. So Rav Ashi says, you know what? I got a fifth example, Nathan. Rav Ashi got a fifth example. He says, what's the fifth example? Bavel. We are now on 36. Simon, you got it? 36A2, the bottom of the page. We're discussing things that over time, there's been name changing over time, and the fact that there's a name change. Now, everything that has a name change does not have practical ramifications necessarily. You refer to something as what's say?
All the practical.
But I'm saying ramifications that are very important for us to discuss, that we need to that we feel necessary to point out, that the rabbis feel are are important. After the name of Babylon is now referred to as Bursif, and Bursif is now referred to as Bavel. So what was once we called these, let's say these were places right next, in the countries right next to each other, right? And now there's been a change. They switched the names of the country that was right here, that was once called Bavel. Now they made a name change to Bursif. And let's say the country that was right next door that was called Bursif, now they made a name change and they called it Bavel. And what is the ramifications of that? What's the importance of knowing that? So the Gemara says, "Might nafkamina." I'm turning the page. Legite noshim. The nafkamina is for a get. Now, what's the difference? What do we mean by a Jewish? The only way a man could divorce a woman, according to Jewish law, is by giving her a certain document that's written in a certain fashion with certain rules and regulations of the document. And even the word get, the gematria of get is gimel. Sounds like the Uber company, right? The get is 12, right? So there's 12 lines in the get, and it mentions his name, her name, the place, the place, the name of the city, and now, where the get is taking place, where it is written, similar to a ketubah, the marriage contract, where it mentions, the place where the marriage is taking place. So Giti Nashim, if you have to name give the right name. If you put the wrong name, if the get took place in location number one, but you wrote a different name, different city, which is not the right name, that will invalidate the get. Just like if you have the wrong name of the man or the woman, it's also invalidate the get. So therefore, it's important to know what is the proper name today of Bavel. Well, until now you called Bavel, that area, that location was called Bavel, is now called, it's like, imagine if the United States is called Canada, and Canada is called the United States.
That's your practical example.
Okay, so it's a new name. It no longer has that name anymore, to thank the president, right? So that's Rashi. That's is one approach Rashi says. And the other approach Rashi says is that the people of Bavel Bavel was a place, a learning center. The rabbis would go from Bavel to Israel and Israel to Bavel, and there was an exchange of students that would go be traveling and studying at those places. And therefore, because of that, it became a learned place, a place of the people, the Hamon Am, the communities, the country became, when you have a yeshiva, when you have learning, and the whole country, they become more learned, knowing the laws properly and following them properly. And one of the things is that it has to be written, the Shema has to be written specifically for this man and for this woman. And you can't have a get, let's say you have a scribe that will prepare in advance Abraham and Sarah, and it's like he'll prepare everything, or not, but wasn't written specifically for them because he doesn't even know who they are, just picking random Jewish names. And it has to be written specifically for this man, and for this woman. It has to be written Lishma. And the people in Bavel were familiar with that halacha. The people in Borsif were not familiar with that halacha. Babylon knew it. Outside of Babylon did not know it. Israel knew it. So if a person would bring a document from one of these places, let's say from Borsif originally to anywhere they would bring a get, they would require the agent who brought the get they would ask him, was it written Lishma? Was it written, we have the name of the man and the woman, but was it done specifically for this man and for this woman, and therefore, if he wouldn't answer, and he would have to, if the offer to be valid, he would have to answer yes in the affirmative. But in Israel or Bavel, since they knew the law, you didn't have to be concerned about that. You didn't have to ask the agent. The agent not have to say. The agent have to testify to that fact that it was written Lishma, but they knew the law. However, now, but what you call Bavel is what you call Borsif. Bavel is Borsif. So if you're going to go, if someone brings a get, the guy says, "I came from," it says in the get that it was written in Bavel. But Bavel, we say today, Bavel is no longer Bavel. It's really Bavel is Borsif, which is not a learned place, and therefore you would have to ask the agent, was it done properly? Was it written with the proper laws of the Jewish laws, how it's supposed to be written, the Shema? But now if a get comes from Borsif is really what? Bavel, right? It was a name change. And now Borsif is Bavel, so that's really came from Bavel. And therefore you won't have to ask them the question. Is it clear, everybody? That is Itinoshim. So that's Hadin Allah Bameh Madlikin. You should return to this parak and learn it again. So that's a big mazel tov, mabruk, everybody, that we finished the second parak. By the way, there is a certain Gemara that in the first parak that we didn't conclude yet. So we still haven't finished the first parak technically. We have to wait for the right day for that. But now mazel tov, mabruk. Now we have the new Gemaras that are on the table here. We're going to take the volume of the new Gemaras and we'll continue the class. It was delivered yesterday, perfect timing. So now we're going to get into the third parak called Kira. So Kira is a certain type of stove, a certain type of oven, and morning. And we're going to be learning about a lot of the laws of cooking. Good morning. We'll see a lot of laws of food preparation for Shabbat. What can be left on a fire? Can something be left on a fire? It has to be left on something not directly on a fire, but something in between, or what has to be removed from the fire before Shabbat. All different laws regarding food preparation, and let's start this Mishnah on Lamed Vav Amud Beis 36b. Kira. If you have this kira, they say that the kira is a rectangular stove that is open on the top. It is large enough that you could hold 2 pots in this stove. Now, the pots can be placed inside this kira, inside the stove, either directly on the coals or suspended above the coals. And we'll see more details about this. So you have a kira. You have this stove, that it was heated. How did you heat up the stove? You heated it with some sort of straw or with stubble. So that type of stove, nosmin aleha tafshil. You could go ahead and you could place a food onto that stove. Let's take a look at the commentary over here regarding a little bit more details on this. Now, obviously, it's not straw. Straw is not something that, it just goes out. Fire just goes out. It's not something that you're going to, it's not like a coal that you might come to rake the coal because there's fire within to bring out the fire. So therefore, if the fuel for the stove is straw or this type of stuff of stubble, things that are gathered from the field, no sooner tafshul. You could go ahead and you could put a food onto this stove before Shabbat, and so far we don't see any restrictions regarding that. Just you could put the food on. Now, However, if you heated it up with gefet is the waste product of the sesame. After you got the oil out of the sesame seeds, you put if the fuel that's heating up the the stove is gefet or be'etzim or wood, let's say coals, which let's say we'll focus on that, use that as the example. It's heated up with coals. So now, if the stove is heated, if the is heated up with coals, now we have a big issue. Now there's a great concern about maybe I might come to what I do. I have to be concerned that I might come to forget and to rake the coals on the Shabbat. And raking the coals on Shabbat is making a fire. If you rake the coal and you bring out a fire on Shabbat, you elevate the fire, so you could be violating the prohibition of making a fire on Shabbat, or you could by raising the fire, or maybe you might be causing cooking. You might create cooking as a result of that. So there is so therefore the Mishnah says lo yitain. Now the question the Gemara is going to discuss, what does the word lo yitain here mean? Good morning, David. But for now we will translate, don't place a pot on the stove that has coals that are heating up this pot. Don't place it. So we'll for now we'll say, referring to before Shabbat. That's one approach the mission means. Lo yitain, don't place it before Shabbat ad sheyigrof, until you remove the coals before Shabbat. You want to go ahead, if you have a stove that's heated by coals and you heated up your food Friday afternoon, this week Shabbat is very early, around 4:09. I don't know what time candle lighting is, around 4:09. So at 4 o'clock, you've been putting on your food at 3 o'clock, it's been cooking from 2 to 4. 4 o'clock, 4:05, got to remove the coals. If you want to, that's one approach. You got to remove the coals. You can't have the food on the coals, the pot on the coals, because of the concern you might come to rake the coals. Or you don't have to remove the coals. It might be a little dirty process to remove coals. You ever see when you finish a barbecue, it's not so simple getting rid of those coals. And
isn't it easier to remove the food?
Say it again.
Isn't it easier to remove the food?
Okay, but the oven still has a certain amount of heat. You might want to leave it there, but or you go ahead and you could put ashes on the coals. If you put ashes on the coals, that means it shows you that's going to cool off the coals. You're not going to come to, and therefore that will be a reminder for you. You're not going to come to. The coals are going out, and therefore it will not be a problem for you, and therefore you won't come to rake those coals. Okay, Beis Shammai says that what are you allowed to place on the stove before Shabbat? Beis Shammai says chamin. You could put hot water on the stove, but hot water. Yeah, but you're right. Here we're talking about chamin. Here we're referring to specifically hot water and not food. Beis Shammai will have to see what's the problem, what's the difference between water and food. Beis Shammai says chamin avolo tafshil, but you can't put food on these coals or even if, let's say we're going to learn, even if you remove the coals, right? Because he's saying, till now we said in the Mishnah, the first reading that we're reading the Mishnah, if you want to leave food on the coals, you can't. You have to remove the coals. That's one approach, right? You can't have the food on the coals. Either you remove the coals or you go ahead and you cover up the coals, which, like a blech, like people have a thing of a metal tray between the pot and the coals and the fire. That's in a certain sense covering up. You covered up the coals, right? that's going to serve to protect you from raising the fire because you covered up the fire. You're not leaving the fire exposed. Yes.
If you have a blessing, you put food on it, it's still heating it up.
Right, but that's true. It's filling up, but you are reminded you're not going to come to raise the fire, right? What's the concern? The concern is not if you put food on. Technically, there's no problem on a Torah level. There's no issues if you put food before Shabbat on the fire, and you don't touch it. So I didn't do on Shabbat. You did nothing. But the point is, the rabbis are very concerned that you shouldn't touch it. You shouldn't do something. But if you put, it's hard for you, and it's a reminder, and therefore, when you have a blech on, some people now they make the blech that the tray of metal that it actually covers the knobs, that it comes down, right? It's a sheet of metal, and then it has a bot. It comes like that. You ever see that? The old days, it was just a plain sheet.
So
Right.
you say you can't change the temperature
Of the stove. That's exactly that's what our major concern. That's the issue. That's for now. That's the big issue, right, David?
I
We
didn't hear
don't
what you
want
said.
anybody touching that, changing the
Okay.
temperature to raise the temperature. So therefore, we have either some people. Growing up, we did not cover the knobs. Nathan, do you remember covering the knobs growing up? Okay, but covering the knobs did not but now some people are more strict. No problem. What?
Some people have little children, they have covers on the knobs so the kids won't touch it.
Right.
On the light switch, the people don't come to touch the light switch, you might stay walking by.
Right. The bigger problem is when people touch the light switch out of habit. Because out of habit, I mean, if a person touches a light switch, when you walk by and you didn't mean to touch it, right? You touched it. It's not that you didn't have, there was no intention to do anything. So it's not a big issue. Maybe practically you have no light in that room. You can't open it up. It's practically you want to have light. So it's a very good idea. But the big issue is for people who are just in such a habit of opening and closing lights, and on Shabbat, they might close the bathroom light or open, intentionally. And that, doing an act, they forgot at Shabbat. But you intended to do an act and you forgot, but that's a much more serious problem than just by mistake bumping into a light. So Beit Hillel Omrim, Beit Hillel says Chamin v'Tavshil. Beit Hillel says there's no difference between leaving hot water on over there by the stove or leaving food, because once you remove the coals. So what's the concern? What is the big issue? What are you afraid of, right? Beit Shammai seems to be saying, according to one approach, he's making a distinction between food and hot water, even though you already removed the coals, right? Because Beit Hillel says, no, you could keep both on. So we'll have to see more what is the concern of Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai Omrim, the Mishnah continues. Beit Shammai Omrim. Now, by the way, you see there's so much commentary on this Mishnah. It's a very complex, complicated Mishnah. So you're already on the next page in the comment, in 36b4. Beit Shammai Omrim, you turn the page. Note Lin. You could go ahead and you could take off the stove. You could take food from the stove, off the stove on Shabbat, of a lo machzirin, but you can't go ahead and you can't return. And one approach would be, even though the coals, meaning what, if you have food on the stove, we said so far the way you have food on the stove is because the coals were covered or the coals were removed, right? Beit Shammai says, even though the coals are removed before Shabbat, for you to put back anything on that stove, Beit Shammai says, you can't put anything back, even though the coals are removed. You're not cooking it, right? Beit Shammai says still there's a concern. We have to see what his concern is. Beit Hillel says no problem. Beit Hillel says once you remove the coals before Shabbat, therefore, you're allowed to keep food on it. There's no coals, there's no fire. You're not going to come raise a fire. There's no fire to be raised. So, and it doesn't look like you're cooking because you're not putting it back onto a fire. Because there's no fire. Bitila says you could even af machzirin. On Shabbat, you can put back the food. Because you're not cooking anything. There's no fire. The fire has been removed. We'll have to see more tomorrow, more details of this Mishnah. Mabruk to everybody in finishing the second parak of Masechet Shabbat. Really, it deserves a real siyum. Rabbi David Feinstein of blessed memory, when he would finish a parak, a chapter in his class, he would make a whole siyum. But even a chapter is a big deal. Have a great day. To learn together with people a chapter of Gemara is a big deal. Have a great day, everybody.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
We went from slaughtering an animal to a get. How come? What's the significance
Right.
in the last book, in volume 3?
Right. So, because very good, because the second chapter was talking about lighting the candles, what regarding lighting for Shabbat, regarding what could you use to light candles, what could you use for the fuel, what kind of wicks could you use, what kind of fuel could you use. So we were discussing the Friday afternoon lighting for Shabbat. So now we're discussing the Friday afternoon preparation of food for Shabbat. Very good point to point out, Ralph. Thank you so much.
But you didn't answer my question. What did the get have to do with that?
No. So the answer is the get is connected to this part of the previous parak, previous chapter, and the get was talking about things that changed. We said that things changed, the name changed. There was different name changing of stuff.
Okay.
So therefore, that's how we got into the get. But now we're entering a new chapter, and the new chapter is connected to the previous chapter because it's talking about Friday afternoon preparations for the Shabbat.
Okay.
Have a great day.
Okay.
Take care,